Welcome back to another FPL video and podcast. This will be my transfer plans for Game Week 8, and next week I'll delve into my final team selection where I talk about my definitive transfer plans for the upcoming deadline. The deadline stream, of course, will be a thing next week, and the same goes for you. So your fantasy content, the best wildcard and limitless teams will be up, the team selection and the deadline stream, as well as updated versions of all of this week's content, as a lot could happen over this international break. Smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. If you enjoy my content, our aim is to get this to the 200 likes and to keep on pushing towards 35 subscribers and beyond. Check all the links in the description below for my Patreon and the championships. Patreon.com/DylanRCM for access to my videos, amongst many other perks. The Discord server, FPL League, are also there for you to join. And also check out my Spotify. Leave a 5-star review on my podcast. It goes a long way to support my channel. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. On the wildcard, I got rid of Dean Henderson in Game Week 6, but David Raya has been an awful asset in the last 2 game weeks with 3 points across both games against Leicester City and Southampton at home, with Arsenal conceding 3 goals in the process. But I'd still back Arsenal to keep some clean sheets in the upcoming fixtures, although they do get tougher from Game Week 9 onwards. But I think a clean sheet against Bournemouth away is possible, and you're also looking at one of Chelsea or Newcastle away. I would not be surprised if the Gunners could keep another clean sheet in one of those fixtures. So in the long term, I think a double up in the Arsenal defence is still viable, but based on current form, you could definitely make a case for diversifying your defence, and that could include your goalkeeper going for a cheaper option between the sticks. Towards the end of the deadline stream, I made a very ambitious move and I sold Trent Alexander-Arnold to Van den Berg to fund Cole Palmer in the midfield. And in hindsight, of course, selling Trent against Crystal Palace, who have failed to score on multiple occasions, was a mistake. But I still think in the long term, I'd rather have that structure of 2 premium midfielders as well as Erling Haaland up front, rather than having so much money tied up in my defensive line. But Van den Berg isn't someone you want to start week in, week out, and that isn't my plan anyway. He will be my 5th defender, and more often than not, he'll be 2nd or 3rd on my bench. But facing Wolves at home, I took a punt to start him. He got 1 point, and my other options didn't do much better, with Greaves also blanking and Mikalenko missing out entirely. So my defensive line needs a bit of a revamp and also improvement, and I could do that with yet another move being made elsewhere to generate those funds and make them available to me. My 2nd defender is a premium in Gabriel, another disappointment on the wildcard with 2 blanks out of 2 against 2 newly promoted clubs, but I still like Gabriel in the long term, and he does turn up against the better opposition, so to speak, as he proved against Tottenham and Man City in the space of a week with those really tough away games. But I really would expect more clean sheets and returns from these Arsenal defensive coverage in Raya and Gabriel, because otherwise I will be looking at alternatives, maybe Gabriel back to Trent at some stage, or I could downgrade Raya, and that frees up funds to make improvements in the outfield positions, which is the most important thing. But my final defender is Rico Lewis, who got 4 points courtesy of an assist, and I don't really like him too much in terms of how nailed on he is, but at 4.7 million and the low ownership, I think Lewis could offer great value when he does get those minutes and starts, but you can't count on it every single week. So if you do go for Rico Lewis, I've always said this, try to have that defensive depth available to you so you can cover for him in the case that he's benched, and you just have to hope he doesn't get 1-pointers making a substitute appearance. But with Rodri out for the season, I think Lewis will get even more game time and starts, but it doesn't mean he's going to start 30 plus Premier League games. That's something that remains to be seen, but I do like his assist threat, the bonus points potential, and that's actually assists in 2 consecutive games for him, including the Champions League in that 4-0 win they had in midweek against Bratislava. So overall, my defensive line was fairly underwhelming, no clean sheets whatsoever, but 1 attack and return by Rico Lewis. The timing of this particular transfer wasn't great, or ideal at least, but I still like Cole Palmer in the long term, and structurally, I want to go for 2 expensive midfielders in this position, and it gives me more versatility with my future moves. But with Cole Palmer, the next 4 fixtures don't look great, and it was always going to be tough against Nottingham Forest, who have some of the best defensive stats in the entire division. But Palmer still got a return. Everything went through him as usual, and his stats are incredible. For creativity, he's 2nd only behind Saka, and in terms of goal-scoring threat, only the likes of Erling Haaland are significantly better than him. So Palmer will be right up there in terms of the highest-scoring FPL players this season. It wouldn't surprise me if he was number 1 like he was in the previous campaign. My 2nd midfielder is Semenyo, who did blank against Leicester City. He's been very disappointing as well on the wild card. He got one return against Southampton, but with those fixtures, you would have expected a little bit more from him. He might even do well against the likes of Arsenal, Aston Villa, and Man City up next for Bournemouth, but you really would want him from Game Week 12 onwards when Bournemouth have a fantastic fixture run. But I think for the time being, he is definitely benchable, or in some cases, you might want to sell him if you're forced to start him week in, week out, because there are so many other midfielders with better fixtures and a higher ceiling over the next 3 game weeks. The next up is Saka, who got 16 points, his biggest return of the season so far, with 1 goal and 2 assists. He once again created 7 chances, had 7 shots. The stats were simply ridiculous, and it was another great performance, just like he did against Leicester. But in Game Week 6, he didn't do anything, which was very, very surprising to say the least, but he did deliver this time round, especially for those that went there with the captaincy. A slight regret of mine not to go for him in the end. I thought Erling Haaland would do very well, but in the end, he blanked, and Saka was the standout captaincy option of Game Week 7. But to complete this midfield, the likes of Rodgers were in my team, and he was very poor against Man United. His final decision making was just not on it, and overall it's a very boring game, and it's actually produced the lowest XG of any match in the last 2 seasons, and I'm not surprised by that given how both teams played and also the lack of quality in that match. And next up is Mbeumo, who scored a penalty, got a bonus point. He is so consistent, and I have to say Mbeumo is my favourite midfielder at the moment at that price and below. I don't really see anybody else really comparing to him. Even Brennan Johnson, who's in form. I do like McNeil amongst the budget midfielders. Smith Rowe is still a decent choice, and you've got quite a few others to compete with. Luis Diaz, Jota, and Jared Bowen, who I recommended a lot in the last couple of weeks. But Mbeumo is the most consistent, as well as having great fixtures. He's on penalties, and he's a talismanic figure for Brentford. Just the one return amongst my forwards, which was Solanke providing an assist for Brennan Johnson. That was the opening goal Spurs scored. They went 2-0 up at half-time and somehow ended up losing the game, with Brighton making a great comeback in the second half, but Spurs really let it slip, and they should have done better to seal off that game. Solanke produced exactly 0 XG, but he did create that one big chance for Brennan Johnson, and I still like him as a long-term asset to tick along nicely. But one thing I'd like to see from him is to get bonus points when he gets just one attack in return. He hasn't done that yet in a Tottenham shirt, but of course for Bournemouth he was a talisman up front. Everything went through him, and with Spurs he's getting the bulk of the big chances but not the bonus points, and that's one of my major criticisms with Solanke, but that could certainly change over the next couple of weeks. And finally, Erling Haaland, a massive disappointment against Fulham. He scored a hat-trick against them last season, but this time round he could do nothing in that 3-2 victory, which saw Man City reclaim second place. It was a disappointing week for me despite the green arrow from 1.7 million to 1.3 million. I got 53 points and I've gone up to 439 points overall. The league code is there and there is a link in the description as well. But I captained Haaland over Saka, and as discussed in my deadline stream, if I only made one free transfer, I would have kept Trent Alexander-Arnold and sold Luis Diaz, who was benched of course, and we got the reports before the deadline passed. I would have sold them to Jared Bowen, and if not, my alternative was Brennan Johnson. So buying Cole Palmer isn't a regret, but maybe the timing of it and keeping Trent for one more week at least would have paid off big time, but it is what it is. I'm still very confident about my moves in the long term, but I do recognise that my defensive line needs some improvement, as I've got Vandenberg, Mykolenko and Greaves, and there's no guarantee that Mykolenko will be available for Game Week 8, although I think it's a minor issue and he should be fit in time for the next match for Everton. But overall, it's a decent squad. There is room for improvement, and the wildcard hasn't been great in Game Week 6, but I'm looking to bounce back and make a big rise up the ranks in the next month or so. Last season, Arsenal kept 2 clean sheets against Bournemouth in a 4-0 victory at the Vitality Stadium, and they also followed that up with a 3-0 victory at the Emirates, although they were a bit lucky to not concede in that particular match. But I'd expect Raya and Arsenal assets to produce some clean sheets fairly soon, and Bournemouth away is a great opportunity. I have more confidence in the Gunners defensively in away matches compared to the Emirates. I've mentioned this stat before: 45 league goals conceded at the Emirates in the last 3 seasons and only 32 on their travels. There's a big difference in terms of clean sheet chances and also the amount of shots they concede. It's a more defensive approach arguably in a lot of those away matches, but they're more disciplined and they show more concentration in the vital moments. So David Raya is for me the best goalkeeper in Game Week 8, but if he doesn't deliver, he might be on the chopping block at some point later in the season. I have my concerns about my defensive line, but if Rico Lewis starts against Wolves away, I'd be fairly confident that it could look good for Game Week 8 at least. The clean sheet chances might not be the best, but Man City could put Wolves to the sword here as they're really struggling for form. It's 1 win in 17 now for Wolverhampton Wanderers. Gary O'Neill is on the brink of being sacked, although I think he'll be given a bit more time, and that's what the reports lately indicate. There is a great fixture run for Wolves from Game Week 9 onwards, and I would encourage you to consider Cunha up front or Nuri as a 4th or 5th defender. But for Game Week 8, it's all Man City, and I think Rico Lewis can get something, whether it's a clean sheet, attack and return, or possibly bonus points. But my second defender is, of course, none other than Gabriel, and doubling up on that Arsenal defence against Bournemouth away. If they keep a clean sheet, that would be massive for my week, and I could see myself having a decent foundation for a green arrow. So a lot depends on my Arsenal assets, as I've got that triple up, and I just hope for the best in terms of their clean sheet odds. But my final defender would be Mykolenko, who's currently yellow flagged, facing Ipswich Town away. I don't really expect an Everton clean sheet here, but they kept one against Newcastle and they could make it 2 out of 2. But away from home against an Ipswich side who are creating chances, Delap is on fire. I'm not entirely confident about this, but Branthwaite always makes me a bit more positive about Everton's prospects of keeping a clean sheet and winning football matches. Their fixtures remain excellent until Game Week 14 in early December, but I haven't been able to enjoy an Everton clean sheet because Mykolenko, of course, missed out that game against Newcastle in the 0-0 draw, and the same goes for Branthwaite, but I'm hoping for the best here, and let's see if Mykolenko can finally deliver something for me. My current plan is to revert to a 3-4-3 formation with Cole Palmer facing Liverpool away. I think if Liverpool dominate the ball and attack really high up, Chelsea could hurt them with the transitions, with the wing play, and Cole Palmer thrives in such scenarios. He's on penalties and he hasn't missed one so far in his career. He creates so many chances from open play, so I'm still fairly confident Palmer can tick along nicely in these tougher games against Liverpool and Arsenal and do very well against the likes of Newcastle and Man United in the meantime. And by Game Week 12, you're probably going to want to find a way to buy Cole Palmer because Chelsea have a great fixture run from that point onwards. Next up would be Bukayo Saka facing Bournemouth away. He scored in both matches last season against the Cherries, and I could see him doing very well in this match. I wouldn't mind captaining him actually, but I think Southampton at home was the best opportunity to captain Saka against someone like Erling Haaland, who faced the likes of Wolves away, and Southampton at home, who have an XGC figure of 13.6. They both have the exact same in that particular stat, and they've got two of the worst defences in the Premier League, whilst Bournemouth can be a decent side and cause problems for the top teams, including Arsenal. But the third midfielder would be Morgan Rogers against Fulham away. I could even make a move here and sell him to McNeil as one particular example, but I've only got one free transfer after using two of them in Game Week 7. I was very aggressive with those moves, and maybe in terms of the points I scored in Game Week 7 and a few other factors, it would have been best to have only made one free transfer or done nothing at all and start Chris Wood over Luis Diaz. But it is what it is. I've made my bed. Morgan Rogers is still a decent FPL option, but not the most consistent in terms of goals and assists combined. And the final midfielder would be Mbeumo. There's no denying this, no doubts about it whatsoever. Despite facing Man United away from home, Brentford might struggle here if United employ a more defensive approach, but Brentford are scoring goals so early in 4 consecutive matches. It's a Premier League record in 1 minute 30 seconds or under. They're just scoring their opening goal. Could they make it 5 in a row? It honestly wouldn't surprise me, and if Mbeumo's involved, I'd be more than happy for that to be the case. I'm fairly satisfied with my front line in Game Week 8 with Solanke facing West Ham in that London derby. Now, the Hammers did get a victory at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium last season with Jarrod Bowen also getting a return, but I still like Solanke in this game as Spurs could easily score 2 or 3 goals past that weak West Ham defence who seem to be shipping in goals every single match day. Only the one clean sheet for them back in Game Week 2, I think, against Crystal Palace, but Solanke is one of my favourite Spurs options in the long term, alongside Brennan Johnson and Pedro Porro, but I'd probably rank the Spurs defenders quite low down in that list, including the Spaniard, because they aren't keeping enough clean sheets. They might have kept 1 or 2 against the likes of Everton and Man United, but you can't really trust them from that perspective, but they'll always create chances, and as long as Solanke can get bonus points, I'm very happy to keep him in the long term. My second forward would be Erling Haaland facing Wolves away, who are bottom of the Premier League table, and it's hard to see them getting any result here. But last season, Wolves got the victory against Man City. It was in fact City's first loss of that season, which was very surprising, but there was no Rodri in that time, and obviously that had a big impact on the game, and Rodri won't be available for the rest of the season, but it's very difficult to see that sort of result considering how both teams are playing and the form they're both in. 1 win in 17 for Wolves, whilst Man City are unbeaten since December in 2023. The final player in my starting 11 and my third forward would be Chris Wood, facing Crystal Palace at home. It's a good fixture considering the Eagles are in the bottom 3 of this season so far. They're winless and they're really struggling to score goals, but defensively they're quite decent, especially with that back 3 of Lacroix, Chabala, and also Mark Gay. But Chris Wood has this pattern of scoring, blanking. If that continues, he will blank in Game Week 8 and probably return in Game Week 9. I've benched him on several occasions this season. In one of them, he did come off the bench for Diogo Jota and give me 8 points, but on the other 2, he was left on my bench getting 8 to 9 points, and that's what happened in Game Week 7, unfortunately. But I think from now on, I'm very happy to start Chris Wood week in, week out, with Semenyo dropping to the bench, facing the likes of Arsenal, Aston Villa, and Manchester City. Speaking of which, it's very important to highlight the bench as well. Valdimarsson is my backup goalkeeper. I wouldn't expect him to really come on at any point. Semenyo, Greaves and Van den Berg fill up the rest of my 15-man squad. So if Mykolenko is available, he would be my third defender. With Greaves as my backup, he's ready to come in just in case in that direct matchup between Ipswich Town and Everton. Van den Berg will definitely be last on my bench, facing Man United away. Despite how bad the Red Devils may be, if Ten Hag is going to be the manager or not, I did still expect Man United to get a goal there against Brentford, who have been quite shocking defensively anyway. So I'm relatively happy I didn't go for Flecken, but you've got plenty of options at 4.5 million to even 5 million. Onana's a good choice in goal, as discussed in the best wildcard team. The likes of Sales, who's currently an injury doubt. He was withdrawn from the Belgian squad, but if he is available, I think is a good way of covering that Nottingham Forest defence. And you've also got Robert Sanchez at 4.7 million. He might be one to buy from Game Week 12 onwards. But in terms of the captaincy, my current plan is to go for Erling Haaland. Maybe I'm being a bit too boring and also template with my captaincy picks, and that's resulted in my downfall, or one of the reasons why I've started to struggle a little bit in the last couple of game weeks. But I was getting it spot on in the first couple of game weeks, especially up until Game Week 3. Then, as soon as I started making some transfers and also getting captaincy decisions wrong, I've experienced some massive swings and red arrows against me. But I think this week, Erling Haaland against Wolves away, it's a great fixture. Wolves are really struggling defensively. I think Man City will score 3 or 4 goals, and Erling Haaland has blanked twice. He has never done it 3 times in a row throughout his Premier League career. Saka is still a great choice to maybe go against him. Solanke's a decent outside shout, but apart from that, I don't see many in my setup who can really compete with Erling Haaland. If Palmer faced anybody but Liverpool away, and I think the same would apply to Arsenal or Manchester City away from home, I wouldn't mind captaining him, even if he was facing those opponents in a home match. That's how good Cole Palmer is, and he will be in my captaincy thoughts in Game Week 9, 10, and possibly in the future as well. But for now, Erling Haaland will be my captain for Game Week 8. The same probably applies for Game Week 9 when he faces Southampton at home. And for those with the triple captaincy still available, you've got a big decision to make potentially. Do you play the triple captaincy in Game Week 8 against Wolves away, or in Game Week 9 against Southampton at home? My current preference would be with the Saints in that home match in Game Week 9. There is a link to Drafthound in the description below. I'd highly encourage you to check it out. I've been using it for over a year now, and there are so many different tools and metrics that you can use to optimize your FPL team and have more fun playing the game. On screen you can see their recommendations for my transfers, and their top suggestion is Semenyo to Kovacic, who has had an excellent start to his FPL season. Solanke to Welbeck is second, and Rodgers to Buonanotte is third. I actually think suggestion number 3 is probably the most likely transfer I'd make. It might not be Buonanotte specifically, it could be another budget midfielder like McNeil, for example, as I've got 0.3 million in the bank, but I do like Buonanotte. I saw a lot of him during his time at Rosario Central when he was coming up through the ranks. He plays his best football in central positions. He's a very technical player and very intelligent in my opinion. When he plays on the right-hand side like he did for Brighton Hove Albion in the last couple of years, I don't think you see his best football. It's still his parent club, so we'll see how he does this season and then develops and goes back to Brighton potentially. But I do like Buonanotte as a short-term punt, and Leicester City's fixtures are fantastic. But in terms of the optimization tool, they've put Saka as the vice-captaincy and then Greaves in for Van den Berg, with Mykolenko, Solanke and Van den Berg on the bench. The only thing I disagree with is Solanke second on the bench with Semenyo in the starting 11. Apart from that, I think it's spot on with the captaincy, the vice, and generally speaking, the foundations of the team. Greaves versus Mykolenko is a tough bet, and if Mykolenko is unavailable, I wouldn't be happy to start Greaves, but it wouldn't be the worst thing to do in the world, and it might be better than using a free transfer because I've only got one available, which puts me in a precarious position over the international break. Check out the link in the description below for Drafthound. I'd highly recommend it. And let's now head over to fpl.team, a website which gives you the ability to visualize future game weeks. It's worth highlighting that my Game Week 8 team isn't fully logged in. I could still make a free transfer, and that could be Rodgers to a McNeil, for example, or I might even bolster my defensive line. If Mykolenko is out for a prolonged period of time, I could also sell him to a 4.6 million defender. That could be another upgrade I'd be looking to make, and eventually one of Greaves or Vandenberg, probably Greaves at this moment in time, would make way for a better defender at around 4.5 million. But in Game Week 9, if I do roll the transfer in Game Week 8, I'd have two available and have Raya in goal against Liverpool at home, with Gabriel forming that defensive double-up against one of the best teams in the division, with Rico Lewis at home to Southampton, which looks excellent, and Vandenberg against Ipswich Town at home. Could that be Brentford's first clean sheet of the season? On paper, it would certainly seem so, but I don't trust the Bees defensively whatsoever. My midfield would be Palmer, Mbeumo, Saka and Rodgers, with a front line of Wood, Solanke and Erling Haaland. So it's a very strong attacking lineup. My only concern will be the double up in the Arsenal defence against Liverpool at home, and my bench would have Valdimarsson, Semenyo, Mykolenko and Jacob Greaves. So my defensive depth doesn't look that bad for Game Weeks 8 and 9, assuming that Mykolenko is fit, but Rico Lewis is always a rotation risk, especially with the Champions League coming into play after the international break once again. You've also got the Carabao Cup, and later in the season, we've got the FA Cup from January onwards. The captaincy would be Erling Haaland in Game Week 9. I've got no doubts about that whatsoever, and Mbeumo would be the vice. I don't think I'd go for Saka, although he could do something against Liverpool, but I don't expect a massive return from him. And another shout would be Cole Palmer, actually, against Newcastle at home. If you don't have Erling Haaland and you've got a situation where you've got Salah, Saka and Palmer, I'd definitely go for Palmer as the captaincy in Game Week 9, but we'll talk more about that as we approach the Game Week 9 deadline. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. Our aim is to get this to 200 likes and to keep on pushing towards 35 subscribers and beyond. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the other links in the description below for my Patreon and the championships for early access to my videos, amongst many other perks, the Discord server, FPL League, Drafthound, as well as Spotify. Leave a 5-star review, it goes a long way to supporting my channel. I wish you all the best of luck for Game Week 8 and the rest of the season, and I'll see you next time.